I am here with Grant Geyer from Claroty. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Grant, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself to start off?
Yeah, so I've been in the cybersecurity space for 25 years, largely on the vendor side. Now I'm the chief product officer for a company called Claroty. I'm responsible for the product management, engineering, and research roles in my responsibility as chief product officer. In addition to that, given so many attacks against US critical infrastructure over the course of the past couple of years, I've also taken on an additional responsibility of government relations, engaging with academia, engaging with the legislative and executive branch to hopefully be, to provide some expertise and some recommendations regarding public policy with respect to cyber risk of critical infrastructure.
Okay, that's a great background. So what do you make of the law that got passed earlier this year about critical infrastructure ransomware reporting? What is that law all about from your perspective?
Yeah, I think part of the challenge that happened, or I'll say the positive movement that happened in the wake of 9/11, is that the government formed the 16 critical risk sectors, everything from dams to food and agriculture, oil and gas, really trying to understand specific risks against those sectors and establishing sector-specific agencies to help develop risk plans for those respective sectors. While the upside is that they're focused on risks to those sectors and cyber risks to those sectors, part of the challenge is that what it inadvertently has created is a lot of reporting mechanisms that are focused on a per sector basis. And while the upside is that it does enable focus, the challenge is that given kind of the pace and rate and impact of cyber attacks, we're missing an overall national situational awareness picture. And so I view the Cyber Breach Reporting Act as providing CISA or focusing DHS's CISA as the clearinghouse for for an understanding and situational awareness of cyber attacks. And so what the law specifies is that within 24 hours of a ransomware attack, there's a requirement to notify the government if it's a covered entity, a critical infrastructure entity. If it's not ransomware or some other type of breach that occurs, there's a requirement to notify the government within 72 hours of the incident. And the theory of the case here is this enables a whole of government approach to maintain situational awareness with respect to cyber attacks against critical infrastructure so that the government can help organizations respond effectively.
Is it they have to report within 24 hours of becoming aware of the attack, even if the attack was earlier, or is it they have to? Are they I guess they can't report if they don't know there's an attack, but are they penalized for being late like that, or?
So there's still the rules that are being developed. Part of the legislation was for CISA to develop the rules of how this will be implemented. My understanding is that the focus is as of their awareness, right? That an event occurred, they have a responsibility to notify. You know, a lot was made early on when this legislation was being originally proposed. The original legislation said 24 hours for all breaches, and the challenge is there's a fog of war within the very first few hours or first day of an event, and so through engagement, really positive engagement between the legislative branch and private industry, the legislators took that advice and changed it to a 72-hour period to ensure that organizations could really understand impact. Now, one point I'll make also on ransomware is it's not just a ransomware attack has occurred, but also an extortion opportunity. So if an organization, if a third party said to an organization, look, if you don't do X and Y X, Y, and Z, or we're going to launch this cyber attack, that is in scope of what is defined as a ransomware event. So it's also the threat of extortion that needs to be notified within 24 hours.
Well, I mean, it sounds, at least in theory, like a great idea, because one of the problems that I think everybody has had, all the stakeholders in cybersecurity, from the government to the industry to corporate security executives, is nobody has a full picture of what's going on from any dimension. And so it's like we're all talking, but nobody knows what we're talking about. So not that that ever stopped anybody, right? But, you know, at least maybe now you could say, okay, well, we know last month there were 1,000 ransomware attacks. So you kind of, or are they going up? Are they going down? And, you know, so it's like a basis for constructive conversation or action.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that Senator Peters earlier this month put out a report suggesting that the number of ransomware attacks happening is significantly greater than what's actually being reported. And in some of the estimates, they suggested that only 25% of the ransomware attacks were actually reported. Claroty conducted a research study in late 2021 with 1,100 respondees worldwide to the survey. We were focused only on critical infrastructure organizations, industrial organizations, or asset-intensive entities. And what we found is that 80% of the respondents said that their organization had been impacted with ransomware over the course of the past year, and 62% actually paid the ransom. Now, so that was kind of like, you know, there was so much to be made about ransomware. Our thought process was, do we really want to ask these questions? And the results were astounding, and I think underscore what Senator Peters reported earlier this month. When looking at specific industries, what really concerns me, and I just took a couple of notes here, in the energy sector, 87% of companies reported a ransomware attack over the past year that was effective. 67% of them paid the ransom, and the amount of the ransom paid was $500,000 to $1 million. So if you start to add up how much of the economy is impacted and the size of these ransoms that are paid, you start to realize that there's an economic model, a market model at play here, where the ransomers have a very large addressable market. They're very calculated in their approach of what organizations they're going to go after, their ability to pay, their criticality to supply chains or critical infrastructure. So, you know, the depravity is really sad that these ransomers are trying to put decision makers at these organizations between a rock and a hard place, that if they don't pay, there's an impact to public safety, impact to patient safety, impact to economic, there's economic impact, whereas the decision to pay the ransom can be measured in hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, and it becomes all too easy of an equation for organizations to pay. And so that's really kind of, I think, underscores the need for a legislation of this type to help ensure that there's effective reporting and effective situational awareness.
So that makes sense. One of the criticisms of the law is that companies may resist reporting. That there's like for a lot. Do you think that's true? That people will hold off, will avoid reporting?
Well, voluntary reporting clearly hasn't worked in the past. Just looking at the discrepancy between even what we're finding in terms of cyber attacks and ransomware attacks, and what you know, and what it was actually been reported to authorities. So voluntary reporting is not working, and so you know, the hope is by making it the law of the land, organizations have a, you know, it is non-negotiable whether they report or not. There's also in the legislation various mechanisms by which CISA and Department of Homeland Security can specifically request information if they deem that there's evidence that an organization was breached. and they can compel organizations to provide this information as well. And so there are a set of enforcement capabilities within the law that help ensure that there is some teeth associated with it.
And that would seem to be right, because if you're a critical entity, even if you're a private concern, there's a public risk, a public good. Like if you're managing a power supply, there's danger if you're disrupted or effect on the public. So probably just like any other safety regulation, this is another. And I think that these things can become safety issues. Or even just convenience issues. Like I was with the Colonial Pipeline ransomware. I wrote a story. I researched this a little bit and found out that ransomware attack cut off fuel deliveries to American Air Force bases.
Sure.
Which wasn't like whatever, was not the end of the world, but it showed how even the defense infrastructure was vulnerable to this attack.
Well, I'd say as part of the U.S. economy is that we have made a set of purposeful decisions that while government plays a role in some aspects of providing services, like clean drinking water, ensuring the flow of fuels and throughout the eastern seaboard, energy productions, broadly speaking, those are owned by private asset owner and operators that can make purposeful decisions around where they're choosing to invest and not invest. And ultimately, I believe that there's what's clear also is that the U.S. government is stepping in to add in systems of I'll say both incentives and disincentives for non-compliance. You only need to look so far as the attack on Oldsmar's Florida water supply last year to see that this was an example of an attacker getting into the environment with an attempt to actually change the levels of lye in the water. Like there was literally the attacker moved the cursor across the screen to change the levels of lye. Luckily, an astute operator saw it, notified their management, they stopped the breach from occurring. Now, this was an example before the breach happened of a operator coming out and saying, this is what we saw. They notified law enforcement, small local community, but they notified law enforcement. It was well publicized. What is seldom understood is that 3 or 4 weeks prior to that, a similar breach happened in a water utility in Northern California using the same exact attack mechanism that had not been reported. So the point here is that it's not just important to report, but really to use these opportunities as what I'll call a cyber safety board, or kind of the equivalent of an NTSB for cyber incidents, so that others can learn from the incidents that happen, and we don't have the challenge of repeat events, or minimize the challenge of repeat events so others can learn from them.
And so what is Claroty's perspective on this? Are you like, how do you approach this issue of ransomware for your clients?
Well, so our focus is on protecting organizations' cyber physical systems from cyber attacks. And what that briefly means is that more and more with digital transformation, organizations are trying to gain efficiencies or automate what happens in the physical world with cyber components. And the challenge is now attacks against cyber systems can impact what happens in the physical world, as has happened with other events like this. Our focus as a software provider and as an offering provider in the industry is really to help keep the bad guys out and let the good guys in, and we produce software to do that. From a public policy perspective, our thinking is that transparency is really important. There was also another piece of legislation called the Better Cybermetrics Act that ensures that the FBI, National Science Foundation will work in concert to report on different types of cybercrime so that we can understand impact. And so in terms of Claroty's perspective, what we see is so many of these public utilities, manufacturing utilities, parts of the national critical infrastructure are not effectively secured. And we believe that the more transparency there can be into the state of cybersecurity incidents, the more effectively companies like Claroty and others can be at helping organizations understand their risk levels and improve their risk levels to prevent the potentiality of a cyber attack that could cripple the nation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds like a good general policy direction. I think companies should. I think one of the reasons they're maybe resistant to this is they're worried about how it looks, or they're worried about the impact of a disclosure on their stock price or something. And I think they should know. I think that the research shows that even a bad cyber attack might affect a company's stock price for like a week or two. Like there's really not, like there's this nightmare scenario like, oh, the stock's going to tank. Not really. That's really what experience has shown. It might be a temporary hit, you know, but it's affecting everybody. Like you said, I mean, if 87% of companies in that, even in that industry, are getting attacked, it's like join the club, you know. Or what it may also have to do with is maybe companies don't want to be. I mean, I work in like public relations, so I'm sort of sensitive to this. They don't want to look like they're paying off criminals, but I think I think a lot of companies are involved in stuff like that more than they might admit. Like they may pay, you know, kidnapping ransoms in certain parts of the world and stuff, but they don't want to be talking about it, you know, on the 6 o'clock news. Well, good. Well, this is a really interesting conversation, and I have a feeling we'll talk again. It was great to have you on, and thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Yeah.